everyone. This is going to be a very special episode of Ellis and Alice. It's our second episode. But first, we like to have fun on this channel and do that sort of thing. But one thing that is no laughing matter is the recent George Floyd thing. Or, not thing. As some of you may not know, a man by the name of George Floyd was brutally murdered by a multitude of police officers in Minneapolis in recent weeks. And I want to give my sincerest condolences to the family of this man, and please ask that this death not go unnoticed, that these killers are brought to justice. And yeah, so because of this, there has been a recent development with a classic movie, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind came out in 1939 and was set during the Civil War. If you've ever heard the quote, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn," that's where that's from. And of course, there's a part of that movie where it portrays themes of slavery and things of that nature, which is important to the film itself because it's set during the Civil War. And so that has kind of brought an onslaught of other films people deem offensive. And so today, I want to kind of explore these complaints and remarks. Excuse me, I have my notes here. And just kind of explain why censorship is not the right thing to do. So obviously I explored the themes of slavery, and I watch a channel called The Critical Drinker, who, if you haven't seen him, go check him out. He's a fantastic YouTuber. He does lots of analysis and stuff of that nature. And he did a video on why the past matters, and we can't get rid of movies like these. And honestly, it's a great video. He probably explains it a lot better than I do. And he brought up an interesting point about people who use these absolute atrocities. I'll say people who wade in the wings, because I don't want to get too political on this channel, to push a political narrative. So it's exploitative, is what I'm saying. And we cannot have these thoughts, these stories, these arts censored, and for many important reasons. Now, what movies are they trying to censor? I have here Dirty Harry, because it portrays police brutality in kind of a glorified light, if you will. And movies like Forrest Gump for portraying things like protests, liberals, and counterculture in a bad light. Temple of Doom for portraying its more Hindu elements as bad guys or bad people. Silence of the Lambs for not correctly portraying for not portraying transgenders well. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is Quentin Tarantino's latest film. I'm a big fan of Quentin Tarantino. For portraying a multitude of different things wrong, such as the civil rights movement. And True Lies for having its main villains be Arabian. Now let's explore these different criticisms. And if you notice something, a lot of these have, in one way or another, some portrayal of history. Well, let's start with Dirty Harry. Dirty Harry, though he is a policeman and is brutal, he's not portrayed as a great guy. I mean, they're not showing him in a great light. What he does is wrong. but he's sort of an anti-hero, if you will. So, that one's, that's how I would. Forrest Gump portrays things like the Civil Rights Movement in 1963 for the University of Alabama, AIDS, mental defects, but most importantly, liberals, protesters, and counterculture. But the thing with that is this was back in the 60s, at the peak of Vietnam. So that's a huge step for modern day liberalism. So saying that something is wrong for this is invalid, in my opinion at least. Temple of Doom is another thing that it's not being racist in the traditional sense. It's not, I can't remember, Indians or Hindus. I can't say it's saying that they're Hindus that happen to be evil, but they're evil that happen to be Hindus. And the thing about that is, it doesn't matter what race they are, because they literally tear people's hearts right out of their chest. So at that point, it can be any race from around the world, and you still wouldn't like them. Silence of the Lambs is an interesting case of a transgender serial killer who kidnaps and kills his victims and turns their skin into suit. I don't think that they're very concerned about portraying transgenders well, being that this was a movie that came out in 1991, and that the person who was transgender was a cold-blooded serial killer, if you catch my drift. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is another one that's about history. So in order to have these movies be realistic period pieces, they're not going to be, if it's set in the late 60s, it's not all going to be, you know, whatever in the 60s, I guess, Vietnam and, yeah. This video isn't very scripted, it's just like a list of notes that I have prepared. Vietnam and, let's say, hippies. It's not going to be all of that. 1969 was the height of the civil rights movement. So it's got to have to portray that in a, you know, it's going to have to portray it for what it really was in order to be realistic. So, and True Lies has Temple of Doom syndrome, where it's evil that happens to be Arab, and not Arabs that happen to be evil. So their race is an afterthought. And I'm not saying that's right, but that's not the key focus of the story. But the one that people brought up that I personally noticed was Holiday Inn. That's a movie where Bing Crosby sings Abraham, I think that's the name of the song, but more importantly, he does it in blackface. Now, this is a movie that has been watched every Christmas for 70 years. 70 years. So 70 years, I mean, that was the 1940s. That was pre-civil rights. They're not going to be as woke as they are today. So, I mean, families all around the world have watched this movie for 70 years. Is every single family that watched this movie racist? No, they're just uncomfortable for a couple minutes. And that's the problem. Times change. A movie that came out 81 years ago, set during the Civil War, is not going to live up to our political standards. A movie filmed in the 40s is not going to do the same either. And that's not an excuse to censor these, because you can do anything you want, but if you come to me with censoring movies, you are barking up the wrong tree. And so it's important to not censor these, because that's just as important as not putting jeans on Michelangelo's David. These are all forms of high art that are not to be messed with. But in the case of these movies, especially Holiday Inn, you know, they're just uncomfortable moments, and they're fleeting, and we can watch the rest of the movie, because focusing on these certain themes is missing the forest for the trees, in my opinion. Gone with the Wind is a masterpiece, but people tend to focus on its very subdued slavery themes, and that's the problem. These movies are absolute masterpieces, but people don't focus on what they're supposed to be focusing on. And that's why these things don't matter, is that movies are a high art form, and not all of them are going to be great. They're reflections of the good and bad in humanity. They can make us feel things, laugh, cry, scared, sad. And that's the, I'm sorry, this is the problem, is that movies remind us of who we are and who we once were. They're historical artifacts, and that's the point. Okay, I'm sorry. So these, we've talked about how times are different and they shouldn't live up to our political standards. We said why these details don't matter and why censorship is wrong, because these things are high art forms not to be messed with. And you could make the case for racism or sexism in almost any movie, and it would work. That's how inconsequential themes are. So I want to say that if you censor one movie, it's not going to end with one movie censored. It will keep going until we are essentially sheep. We don't think, we just do our best to appease those who are easily offended. And that's where we need to stop. Movies, music, TV shows, art, they are not to be edited just to fit, just to not offend people. Things will always be offensive. And so, this was a pretty heated video. God, I'm thirsty. But I want to leave you with this. It's a speech from a classic novel, 1984, by George Orwell, which was about a dystopian society where everything has been remade to please people and keep them in a bubble. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And in the process of continuing day by day and minute by minute, history has been stopped. Nothing except an endless present in which the party is always right. This is why this is important. Because if we don't stop the censorship to appease the easily offended, then we will become like 1984. This has been Ellis Analysis.